Get off my porch. Hector Brannigan said it the way a man says it when he means and don't come back. Mabel Hartwell had not even finished her sentence. She was still holding her bag, still standing straight, still looking him in the eye the way her mother had taught her. You look a man in the eye. Mabel, no matter what he says, you don't look away first. She didn't look away, but she turned. And she walked. And behind her, she heard him laugh, not loud, not mean, just the small, dismissive sound of a man who had already forgotten her before she reached the bottom of his steps. That was the 7th time. If this story reached somewhere inside you, somewhere you've kept quiet for a long time, I want you to subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that bell and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far Mabel's story travels. Because what happens next? Nobody in Red Hollow saw it coming. The brass ring had belonged to her mother. It was a thin thing, not pretty by anyone's standard, not worth anything a jeweler would bother to name. The amber stone in the center had a crack running through it that her father had always meant to have fixed and never got around to. And the band itself had gone dark with years of wear, in the way that cheap brass does, taking on the color of old pennies left in the rain. Mabel wore it on her right hand. Her mother had worn it on her left, and Mabel had decided, standing over her mother's bed on the 3rd day of the fever, that she was not going to spend her life copying the shape of something that had already ended. She pressed it into her palm, now hard, the way she always did when she needed something solid to hold on to, and the edge of it left a mark in her skin, a small crescent, red and real. 7 men. She counted them the way you count things when counting is the only honest response to what has happened to you. Not as a list of wounds, as a record, as evidence that the problem was not her arithmetic, but theirs. She had come to Red Hollow, Colorado, with 1 bag, 11 years of experience, running a working farm, 2 dead parents, and 91 days of fighting a land office in Denver, before accepting that some battles are decided before they start, and the only dignified response is to pick up and find a different battle. She had arrived on a Thursday in spring, paid a week's board at Clara Hatch's place, and the next morning begun doing what she had always done when the situation required it. She got to work. The first man was Caleb Farrow. He had a cattle operation on the eastern edge of town that everyone in Red Hollow agreed was well run, which meant he knew what he was doing and also knew exactly what he wanted and was not shy about saying so. Mabel walked out to his place in the morning, introduced herself at the gate, and began telling him what she could do. She got approximately 4 sentences in. "How much do you weigh?" he said. She heard it land, felt it land, kept her face where it was. "I beg your pardon." Ranch work is physical," Caleb Farrow said, in the tone of a man delivering a reasonable and obvious observation. "A woman your size, I'd spend half my time worrying about whether you could—" "I buried my father in February," Mabel said. "Ground was frozen 8 inches down. I dug the grave myself because there was no one else to do it. My hands bled through both gloves." She held his gaze. "Still want to talk about whether I can handle physical work?" Something moved behind his eyes. She thought for a moment it might be something useful, recognition, recalibration, the small seismic shift of a man revising his assumptions. Then he said, "I'll pass. Good day, ma'am." She walked back to town with her hands loose at her sides, and the particular sensation of having said the true thing to a person who had already decided not to hear it. That was one. Willis Pruitt ran a boarding house on the north side of town and needed a housekeeper and cook. He was the kind of man who offered tea before bad news, which Mabel had learned was a specific personality type, people who confused softening a blow with actually softening anything. He asked about her experience. He nodded. He said and "I see," in the places where a reasonable person would say something. Then he set down his cup and said, "I worry about the impression it might make on my guests. A woman of your presentation." Mabel looked at him steadily. "Presentation. It's nothing personal." "It never is," she said. "Thank you for the tea." She left without giving him the satisfaction of seeing what that word presentation did to something just below her sternum. The place where she kept the things that were nobody else's business. That was 2. The third man didn't offer tea or reasons. He opened his door, looked at her, said, "Looking for a ranch hand, not a cook," and closed it again. She stood on his porch for a moment, looking at the door. Then she turned and walked down his steps, with the careful dignity of a woman who has learned that certain moments require her to be larger than the person who just made her feel small. She was getting practiced at that. That was 3. Between the 3rd and 4th, she passed 2 women on the main street who stepped wide around her, not from hostility, exactly. More from the reflexive instinct of people who categorize quickly and then act on their categories. She heard one of them say something to the other in a low voice. She didn't catch the words. She caught the tone, which was enough. She stopped. Not for long. Just for the space of one breath. She stood on the boardwalk of Red Hollow's main street and looked at the mountains to the west, enormous white-peaked, indifferent to everything happening at their feet, and she thought, I am not going to disappear. I am not going to make myself smaller to fit what this town thinks it wants. I am going to walk into the next place, and the next place, and the next place, until someone in this valley has the sense to see what is standing right in front of them. Then she walked into Dale Abbott's store. Dale Abbott was the kind of man who fancied himself fair-minded, which is sometimes the most dangerous kind. He asked all the right questions, listened to all the answers, made the appropriate sounds of consideration, and then said, You know, customer-facing positions really do require the clientele has expectations about. He waved his hand in a circular motion that was meant to cover everything he didn't want to say directly. About the person helping them find flour and nails, Mabel said. Now I don't mean any. I know you don't, she said. That's the part I keep finding interesting. She walked out before he finished whatever he was going to say next. That was 4. She went back to Clara Hatch's that evening and sat at the small table in the common room while Clara moved around the kitchen and didn't say anything for a while, which Mabel had come to understand was Clara's particular form of kindness, knowing when a person needed quiet more than words. Then Clara set a plate of food in front of her that she hadn't asked for and sat down across the table and folded her hands and said, How bad for today? Mabel said. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You know what I noticed about you the day you walked in here? Mabel looked at her. You didn't apologize for taking the room, Clara said. Some women come in here and they apologize for everything, for needing a room, for asking a question, for breathing space somebody else might want. You came in, stated what you needed, paid what it cost, and said thank you. I thought, now, there's a woman who knows what she's worth. Mabel looked at her plate. The trouble, Clara said, is that knowing your worth and getting this town to recognize it are 2 entirely separate problems. I'm working on the second one, Mabel said. I can see that, Clara said. Keep eating. You're going to need it. That was the first meal in 4 days that Mabel ate without tasting. The 5th man. Gus Tully didn't dress it up at all. He said, Already got a wife. Don't need another woman around the place taking up space. Just like that. Taking up space. As though her presence in the world was an imposition on a square footage that belonged to someone more deserving. She said, I understand. Thank you for your time. Because she was not going to give Gus Tully a piece of herself she couldn't get back. That was 5. She walked home by the long way that evening, the road that curved behind the church and gave a clear view of the mountains before it turned back toward town. She stopped at the bend where the view opened up. The Rockies stood in the last light of the day, doing what mountains do, being enormous and permanent and utterly unmoved by the concerns of the people looking at them. She stood there for a long time. She was not going to cry. She had decided this some time ago, decided it with the same deliberate specificity she brought to all important decisions. Tears were something she was allowed in private, and not as a response to other people's failures of imagination. Her grief was her own. Her anger was her own. These men didn't get access to either. But standing at the bend in the road looking at the mountains, she allowed herself one thing. She allowed herself to be tired, not defeated, not broken, just tired, the bone-deep particular exhaustion that comes not from hard work, but from being measured against a standard that was never made to fit you over and over by people who never stopped to question whether the standard itself might be the problem. She stood there until the mountains went gray in the fading light. Then she turned and walked back to town. The 6th man was Orson Hart. He ran a small land brokerage out of a narrow office, and he was in some ways the cruelest of all of them, not because he was mean, but because he was almost reasonable. He asked her sensible questions. He seemed to genuinely evaluate her answers on their merits. He had a ledger open on his desk, and she could see him doing the honest arithmetic of whether she could do the job. Then his partner came through the back door. The door was thin, and the walls were thinner, and she heard every word, "look of the place," and "what clients will think," and "this isn't the image we need." She sat very still in the wooden chair across from Orson Hart's empty desk, and she listened to a man she'd never met decide her value from a hallway. Orson came back in with the expression of a man who has recently been made to do something he knows is wrong and is hoping you won't make it harder for him. "The position has just been filled," he said. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." Mabel stood, smoothed her skirt, picked up her bag. She looked at him for one long moment, not with anger, not with hurt, but with the clear-eyed level look of a woman making sure he understood exactly what was happening in this room. "Mr. Hart," she said quietly, "you know what I am capable of. Your partner doesn't. I hope someday you'll be in a situation where someone lets you speak for yourself before they decide." She walked out. She heard him say nothing. That was 6. That evening, Clara knocked on her door with a cup of tea and stood in the doorway and said without preamble, "Hector Brannigan's place, west edge of town. He's desperate, not picky. Go first thing tomorrow." "I've heard his name," Mabel said. "He needs competence, and he knows it," Clara said. "His spread is struggling, and he can't afford to be stupid about it." She paused. "He might also be stupid about it, but it's worth trying." "All right," Mabel said. Clara looked at her for a moment. "Mabel, I've run this boarding house for 19 years. I have seen women come through this town and get ground down by it until there was nothing left of what they started with." She set the cup on the small table beside the door. "You still have everything you started with. Don't let the number 7 change that." Mabel looked at her. "7's just a number," she said. Clara nodded once, firmly, the way she nodded when something was settled. Then she turned and went back downstairs. Mabel drank the tea in the dark without lighting the lamp and thought about the difference between a number and what people tried to make a number mean. 7 was not a verdict, it was a count. And Mabel had learned young and hard that you could count a great many losses and still not be losing. She went to Hector Brannigan's the next morning. She walked the 2 miles in good weather, arrived at his gate at 7:30, and found him sitting on his porch in the way of a man who had been sitting there a while and was thinking about things that were not going well. His spread showed it not ruined yet, but fraying at the edges, the way things fray when the attention and energy required to maintain them are being stretched too thin. She noticed all of it in the 30 seconds it took her to walk from the gate to the porch steps, because she had grown up on a working farm, and she knew what a place looked like when it was fighting to hold on. She introduced herself, stated her experience, the farm, the years, the specific skills, the fact that she had managed accounts and animals and winter stores and emergency repairs and all the 1,000 unglamorous things that keeping a working property alive actually requires. Hector Brannigan listened to all of it. Then he crossed his arms and said, "I need someone useful, not someone I've got to worry about on top of everything else." She kept her voice level. "I don't require worrying about. I've been doing for myself for a very long time. It ain't personal," he said. "You're calling me a complication," she said, and there was steel in it now, the clean, hard steel of a woman who has swallowed a great deal in 6 days and has decided that this is the last thing she will swallow quietly. "Before you have seen me do a single thing. Before you have asked me one real question. You looked at me and made up your mind, and you're going to call that practical." He didn't have an answer for that. "Ma'am," he said. And that word, the flat, conclusive, get off my porch weight of it. She turned. She walked down his drive. She made it to the bend in the road before her legs informed her in the honest and non-negotiable language of a body that has been pushed past a certain point that they were going to stop for a moment, whether she wanted them to or not. She stopped. She stood at the side of Hector Brannigan's access road in the early morning light, and she looked at her hands, the calluses, the old scars, the crescent mark from her mother's ring still faintly visible from 2 days ago, and she thought, This is what useful looks like. These hands are what useful looks like. And not one of them could see it. She stood there for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she picked up her bag and walked back into Red Hollow. Market day had come to Red Hollow like an uninvited relative, loud, crowded, inconvenient, and impossible to avoid. Every person in the county seemed to have chosen this particular morning to compress themselves into the main street, and Mabel moved through the crowd with her bag over her shoulder and her eyes on the road ahead, navigating the mud and the bodies and the noise, with the focused attention of a woman who has learned that public spaces in a town like this require a specific kind of vigilance. She was watching the ground, watching for the same reason she always watched, because the road between the boarding house and the dry goods store was a treacherous geography of embedded stone and mixed mud that had defeated better footwear than hers. She was carrying the crate of Clara's preserving jars, holding it level, making good time. The stone that caught her boot was unremarkable, flat on one side, angled on the other, precisely wrong in precisely the right position to catch the inside edge of her boot and send her sideways without warning. She went down. The crate went with her, and the sound of it jars hitting the mud. One cracking clean through was loud enough to cut through the noise of the market crowd, and in the half-second silence that followed, she heard something that she would remember for a long time. Laughter. Not one person. Not two. The loose, immediate laughter of a crowd that has witnessed something it considers entertainment from the hardware store porch, from the cluster of men near the hitching post, from somewhere above and behind her. The specific quality of that laughter was something she recognized. It was not surprised. It was satisfied. It had expected this, and was pleased that the expectation had been confirmed. She lay in the mud of Red Hollow's main street. She pressed her palms flat against the ground. She pushed. She got her knees under her, then her feet. She rose out of the mud the way she had risen out of everything else in the past 7 years, methodically, without elegance, without asking anyone for assistance. She checked the crate. 2 jars intact, 1 in pieces. She left the broken one because it was already gone, and she had learned a long time ago not to spend herself on things that were already gone. She picked up the crate. She kept walking. She did not look at the men on the hardware porch. She did not turn toward the hitching post. She put her eyes forward and her chin up, and she walked the remaining distance to the dry goods store, with the particular posture of a woman who has decided that the people laughing at her do not deserve a single degree of her attention. She never saw the man across the street, half-shadowed under the overhang of the feed barn, with a cart of winter furs behind him and eyes that had spent 11 years learning to see what mattered in a landscape most people found unreadable. Silas Crowe stood and watched. He had been watching since she turned onto the main street. He watched her fall. Watched the 1 second, 2 seconds. 3 seconds she spent flat in the mud, not helpless. He could see, it wasn't helpless, could see the assessment happening. The body taking inventory, the mind making the calculation. He watched her hands go to the ground without looking for another pair of hands to pull her up. He watched her check the jar's efficient, practical, no wasted motion. He watched her leave the broken one. He watched her walk. His jaw was tight, not from contempt, from something else, something that moved through his chest with the particular velocity of recognition. The sharp, specific feeling of seeing something in another person that you know because you have lived it yourself. The man beside him. Amos, a Lower Hill trapper, who'd been coming down to Red Hollow since before Silas had started, said without being asked, "That's Mabel Hartwell. Been in town a few weeks. Nobody'll take her on." Silas kept his eyes on the corner where she had turned and disappeared. "Why not?" Amos shrugged. "You know how it is." Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No. Tell me." Amos looked at him sideways. "She's a big woman. Alone. No family, no connections. People see what they see." "What they see is wrong," Silas said. Amos blinked. Silas Crowe rarely editorialized. "Maybe so," he said carefully. Silas picked up his pack. "I'll finish the trading this afternoon." He found her an hour later outside Fletcher's Dry Goods, and he watched the shape of that conversation from the other side of the street before he crossed. Watched Fletcher's head shaking. watched her posture. Hold. Watched the small, careful compression of everything she was feeling into a composure so practiced, it looked like stillness, but wasn't. He knew stillness. What she had was different. What she had was a woman holding a river inside a frame that was not going to let it break. She turned from Fletcher's door and walked straight into him. "Excuse me," she said, immediately stepping back. And she looked up at him with the direct, unfrightened eyes of a woman who has run out of the particular energy required for being intimidated. Most people seeing Silas Crowe for the first time took stock. The height, the breadth, the scar from his left ear to the corner of his jaw. The general quality of a man the wilderness had agreed to keep. Most people finished that inventory and found somewhere else to be. Mabel Hartwell looked at him for one steady beat and then moved to step around him. "You're the woman looking for work," he said. She stopped, turned back slowly, looked at him with the careful eyes of someone who has said yes to that sentence many times and learned to expect what comes after it. "I am." "What kind?" "Any kind of honest work," she said, and the steadiness in her voice was something that had been built, he could tell. Not born, but built. The way calluses are built, through repeated contact with things that hurt. "I can cook, manage a household, keep accounts, tend animals, do basic repairs. I've run a working farm alone for 3 years. I'm not looking for easy." "I know you're not," Silas said. Something shifted in her face. Something small and involuntary, a muscle she had been holding releasing without permission. "You know that," she said carefully. "From what? Watched you get up out of the mud this morning," he said. "You didn't look for a hand. You checked what could be saved left, what couldn't, and kept walking." He held her gaze. "Takes something to do that with half the street laughing at you." She was very still. "You're the first person," she said quietly, "who has described what they saw instead of what they expected to see." "I have a cabin," Silas said. "Up in the mountains, 2 days' ride above the tree line. I need someone who can hold up their end of things through a winter up there." He watched her face do its honest work, calculating, not performing. "It's hard living. Cold, isolated. Animals that'll kill you if you're careless. Work that never stops because if it stops things fall apart. And on a mountain in winter, things falling apart is another way of saying dying." "What's the arrangement?" she said. "Direct as a nail." "Equal," he said. "What you can do matters. Nothing else does." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you asking me specifically?" "Because 7 men in this town have told you no for reasons that have nothing to do with your actual capabilities," he said. "And because this morning I watched you get up off the ground without looking for a single person to help you, and I thought that's someone who knows how to survive." Something moved through her face that he couldn't entirely name. Not gratitude, it was fear, then gratitude. Not relief, it was more guarded than relief. It was the expression of a person who has been right about themselves for a very long time and has just met the first external confirmation. "I want to be clear about something," she said. "I'm not coming up that mountain to be rescued. I'm not coming because I'm desperate and you're offering a way out. I'm coming because it sounds like a place where my work counts for something real." "That's what I'm offering," Silas said. She extended her hand. Not a delicate offering. A direct, firm extension, the handshake of someone who has made real agreements in difficult circumstances and understands what a handshake actually means. I took it. His hand was large and scarred, and she felt the history of 11 mountain winters in the calluses of his palm, and she thought that whatever else this man was, he had not spent his life avoiding hard things. "When do we leave?" "Leave," she said. "Day after tomorrow. Get what you need from town." She nodded, started to turn. "Ma'am," he said. She looked back. "Those men," he said, "they weren't being practical, they were being blind. And there's a difference between a man who can't see and a man who won't. Most of them won't." His jaw tightened slightly. "That's on them, not on you." She looked at him with those clear, undeflected eyes. "I've known that," she said, "for a long time. It's just the first time someone else said it out loud." She walked back to Clara's boarding house with the mud drying on her dress and a decision settling into the bones of her. The way true decisions settle, Not like excitement, not like relief, but like something solid taking up the space where uncertainty used to live. Clara was at the front desk when she came through the door. One look. That was all Clara needed. "You've decided something," she said. "I'm leaving day after tomorrow," Mabel said. "With Silas Crowe, up the mountain." Clara was quiet for a long moment. A careful, weighted quiet. The quiet of a woman who knows a great deal about what the mountain takes from people, and is doing the arithmetic of whether this particular woman can afford the cost. Then she said, "I've watched that man come through this town twice a year for 11 years. People here call him dangerous because they don't understand him. What he actually is." She paused. "Is someone who survived by learning what was real and ignoring everything else." "That sounds familiar?" Mabel said. Clara looked at her. And then she did something Mabel had not seen her do before. She smiled. Small, private, the smile of a woman recognizing something in another woman that most people miss. "Yes," she said. "I imagine it does." She turned back toward the kitchen. "I'll pack you provisions for the road. You'll need more than you think." Mabel went upstairs. She set her bag on the bed and opened it and began the familiar calculation. What stays, what goes, what is worth carrying, and what is only weight. She had done this calculation before. She was good at it. She kept what was useful, what was irreplaceable, what would matter in a place where only real things counted. She kept her mother's ring. She kept her father's compass. She kept the cooking knife. She kept everything she had always been, and left behind everything Red Hollow had tried to make her become. She was ready before dawn. And on the morning she rode out of Red Hollow beside a man who said 12 words where other men said 100 and meant none of them. Mabel Hartwell did not look back. Not because there was nothing behind her worth seeing, but because everything worth seeing was ahead. The road out of Red Hollow was not kind to horses or to people, and Silas Crowe had never pretended otherwise. He told her on the first morning when they were an hour out of town and the trail had already begun its steady climb toward timber and rock. "The path gets worse before it gets better. If your horse stumbles, don't fight the reins. Let him find his feet." "I've ridden worse trails," Mabel said. He glanced at her sideways. "Worse than this. Our east pasture had a gully that flooded every spring and dried into something that looked like the surface of the moon by August," she said. "I rode that pasture every day for 11 years. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "All right." That was the first conversation. It lasted approximately 40 seconds and covered more ground than most conversations Mabel had experienced in the past month. She noticed that about him early, the economy of it. Silas Crowe did not speak to fill silence. He spoke when he had something to say, and when he didn't, he was quiet with the complete and unself-conscious ease of a man who had spent years with no one to talk to and had made his peace with that fact. Most people in Mabel's experience were uncomfortable with silence. They rushed to fill it. They covered it over with noise the way you cover a hole you don't want someone to fall into. Silas let silence sit there and treated it like furniture. She found somewhat to her surprise that she didn't mind. They made camp the first night at the edge of the tree line where the pines grew thick and the temperature dropped fast once the sun went behind the peaks. Silas had a system for camp efficient, practiced no wasted motion, and Mabel watched it for about 3 minutes before she stopped watching and started helping. She gathered wood without being asked. She got the fire started with the flint from her bag before he had finished hobbling the horses, and when he turned around and saw the fire already going, something moved across his face that wasn't quite surprise but was close to it. "You didn't have to," he started. "I know I didn't," she said. "Hand me that pan." He handed her the pan. She cooked from what she'd brought: beans, salt pork, cornbread baked, directly in the pan over the fire, the way her mother had taught her, the way her mother's mother had taught her mother. Simple food. Real food. The kind that filled you up and didn't apologize for not being fancy. Silas ate without speaking for a while. Then he said, "I haven't eaten cornbread since..." He stopped, started over. "It's been a long time." "Since someone cooked for you?" she asked. "Since anyone was up here to cook," he said. She looked at him across the fire. The scar on his jaw caught the light in a way that made it look like a river on a map carved into the landscape of his face by something that had happened a long time ago and left its mark permanently. She wanted to ask about it. She didn't. There was a protocol to learning about a person, and asking about their scars on the first night was outside it. "How long have you been up here alone?" she asked instead. I thought about it. Actually thought about it the way people think about things they haven't counted in a while, because counting stopped mattering. 11 years, he said, since the winter of '63. What happened in the winter of '63? The fire popped. He looked into it for a moment. A lot of things, he said. None of them simple. She nodded and didn't push it, and they sat in the quiet of the tree line with the fire between them and the mountains, enormous and dark above. And Mabel thought that there were worse ways to spend a first night in a new life than sitting in clean silence with a man who didn't demand anything from her, except that she be what she already was. She slept better than she had in a month. The second day was harder. The trail above the tree line was exactly what Silas had described, and also exactly what she hadn't been fully prepared for, not because she doubted him, but because there are things that description can approximate but not replace. The wind above the tree line was a different creature from the wind she had known. It had opinions. It came from 3 directions simultaneously, and none of them were consistent. And it was cold in the particular bone-specific way of high-altitude cold, the kind that finds the gaps in your clothing and makes itself at home. Her horse struggled on the loose rock above 9,000 feet. She didn't fight the reins. She talked to him instead, low, steady, the same voice she used on spooked cattle and difficult mules back on the farm. The voice that said, "I know, and I'm here, and we're going to get through this together." The horse flattened his ears and kept moving. Silas, riding ahead, looked back. She caught him looking. "He just needs to hear that someone's paying attention," she said. Silas looked at her for a moment. Then he turned forward again without comment, but something in the set of his shoulders was different after that. A small, almost imperceptible change, like a door that had been mostly closed, moving another inch toward open. They reached the cabin in the late afternoon of the second day. Mabel saw it from 200 yards out and understood immediately what Silas had meant when he said it was hard living. The cabin was solid. She could see that it had been built by someone who knew what they were doing and had built for permanence rather than comfort. But it was also a one-man operation in every sense, organized entirely around the needs and habits of a person living alone with no consideration for anything beyond survival. It was also filthy. Not dangerously so. Not the filth of neglect or indifference. The specific particular grime of a place that a person has kept functional without keeping clean, because clean was a luxury that took time, and time was something you spent on staying alive. Silas brought their horses to a stop and looked at the cabin and then looked at her, and she could see him seeing it through her eyes for the first time, and something shifted in his jaw. He started. "It's a solid structure," she said. "Good bones. The rest is work." He looked at her. "I like work," she said, and she swung down from her horse. She found the broom inside the door within 2 minutes. She found the bucket. She found what passed for cleaning supplies, not much, but enough for a start, and by the time Silas had finished with the horses and brought the packs inside, she had cleared 1 full corner of the main room and established a system. "You don't have to," he started again. "Silas," she said, not looking up from what she was doing. "Stop telling me I don't have to do things. I know what I don't have to do. When I do something, it's because I've decided to." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "All right." And she heard something in it that she hadn't heard from a man in a very long time. Not dismissal. Not amusement. Something that sounded, if she was hearing correctly, like respect. That first week was a negotiation conducted entirely without words. They learned each other. The way people learn unfamiliar terrain, carefully noting what was solid and what gave way under pressure, where the drop-offs were, and where the ground was reliable. Mabel learned that Silas rose before dawn and was quiet until he'd had coffee, that he kept his hunting equipment with a precision he applied to almost nothing else in his life, that he had 3 books on the shelf above the fireplace that were so worn the spines had given out, and that he read from them in the evenings with the focused absorption of a man for whom books had been at some point the only available company. She learned that he watched her. Not in a way that was uncomfortable. In the way a man watches something he is trying to understand carefully without making it obvious, with the patient attention of someone who has learned that the fastest way to understand a thing is to watch it do what it does and keep your assumptions out of it. He watched her cook, and she could see him filing away information, not just what she made, but how she made it. The decisions, the adjustments, the way she worked through a problem with her hands while her mind was already 3 steps ahead. He watched her fix the broken hinge on the storage cabinet on the 4th day. She found the tools in a box under the workbench, selected what she needed, and had the hinge remounted and the door swinging true inside 20 minutes. When she turned around, he was leaning in the doorway with his coffee cup, and he said without preamble, "Where did you learn that?" "My father," she said. "He believed women should know how to fix what was broken, so they didn't have to wait for someone else to fix it." "Smart man," Silas said. "He was," she said. "He was also stubborn as a post and wrong about several things, but he was right about that one." Something happened at the corner of Silas Crowe's mouth. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was in the neighborhood of one. That was the first time she'd seen it, and it lasted approximately 1 second, and then it was gone. But she'd seen it, and she filed it away, the same way he filed away everything about her. By the end of the first week, they had established something that Mabel could only describe as a working rhythm. Not a plan. They hadn't sat down and divided anything up formally. It had emerged the way real arrangements emerge between competent people organically, each person moving toward where they were most useful, the gaps filling themselves. Silas hunted and trapped and maintained the outer perimeter of the property. The trap lines, the wood supply, the structural repairs that required his particular combination of size and experience. Mabel ran the interior, the cooking, the preserving, the clothing repairs, the accounting of supplies, and what would be needed for winter, and when it would run short if they weren't careful. She found his supply records on the 2nd day. A battered ledger entries made in a handwriting that was careful and precise but widely spaced, each one brief: salt low, flour adequate, candles need. The system of a man who tracked what was necessary and nothing more. She took the ledger and expanded it. She noted not just current levels, but rates of consumption, projected shortfalls, the rough timeline between now and the first serious snow. When Silas came in from his trapline on the 4th day and found the ledger on the table, 3 pages of her handwriting added to his 3 lines, he stood and read it for a long moment without speaking. "You did this today," he said. "Yesterday afternoon," she said. While the stew was cooking, he read another page. "You figured the flour would run short by mid-January. At current usage, yes. We'll need to either reduce consumption starting now or make a supply run before the first snow closes the lower trail." He looked at her. "The lower trail closes in October." "Then we have 6 weeks to decide," she said. "I'd suggest the supply run. What we save by rationing isn't worth what we lose if we're short in February." I was quiet for a long time, looking at the ledger. Then he set it down on the table and said, "I've been coming up short in February for 3 years running." "I know," she said. "I can see it in the records." He looked at her with something that was not quite embarrassment and not quite surprise. Something more complicated than either. "Nobody's ever—" He stopped. "Nobody's ever what?" "Looked at those numbers and told me what they actually meant," he said. She held his gaze. "What did you think they meant?" "I thought they meant I was bad at planning," he said flatly. "You're not bad at planning," she said. "You're one person doing the work of 2, and you've been tracking supplies in your head instead of on paper, and those are 2 different problems with 2 different solutions." He was very still. "The problem was never the numbers," she said. "The problem was you didn't have enough hands." Something moved through his face, a long, slow wave of something she recognized, because she had felt it herself, that particular sensation of a thing. You have blamed yourself for being suddenly reframed as a thing that was simply too large for one person. Not weakness, not failure, just math. "Now you have enough hands," she said, and went back to the stove. The first real test came at the end of the 2nd week, and it came from the mountain itself. Silas had gone out at dawn to check the northern trap line, the farthest one 2 hours from the cabin at the edge of the territory he maintained. He told her he'd be back by midday. He was not back by midday. He was not back by mid-afternoon. Mabel kept working. She noticed his absence, the way you notice a sound that stops a presence, that the air rearranges itself around. She did not panic. She kept the fire. She finished the preserving she'd been working on. She made a calculation about how late was late enough to be concerning, and then kept working until she reached that number. When the number arrived mid-afternoon, the light already going thin, and the temperature dropping with the particular speed of mountain evenings, she went to the door. She stood in the cold, and she listened. Wind. The creak of the structure settling. A bird somewhere to the east. Nothing that sounded like a man and a horse returning from a trap line. She went back inside. She got her coat. She got the lantern. She went to the wall where Silas kept his maps, hand-drawn, meticulous, the maps of a man who had walked every inch of his territory and needed to be able to find any inch of it in the dark, and she studied the northern trap line. She was memorizing the route when the door opened. Silas came in like something the mountain had chewed on and spit back. His coat was torn at the left shoulder. There was blood on his left hand, not dripping, dried to a dark rust color, which meant it had been there a while. His face was the color of cold, and his jaw was set in the way of a man who has been dealing with something painful for several hours, and has decided that dealing with it is simply the current condition of his existence. Trap line snapped, he said. Wire, hit my hand, had to reset the whole northern section. Mabel looked at the hand, then she said, sit down. It's fine. I can see it's not infected yet, she said, which means if we clean it properly it won't be. Sit down. Mabel. Silas. She said his name the way you say a name when you want someone to understand that the conversation has a conclusion and you've already reached it. Sit. Down. He sat. She cleaned the cut. It was deep. A wire cut. The kind that doesn't look as bad as it is, because wire cuts are straight and clean and hide their depth until you get into them. She worked with the efficiency of someone who had dealt with farm injuries her entire life, with the supplies she had reorganized and inventoried in the first 3 days, because she had known with the certainty of practical experience that a setup like this would eventually require them. I didn't make a sound while she worked. She could feel him watching her face. You were going to come look for me, he said. I was studying your maps, she said. That's the same thing. She didn't answer right away. She finished wrapping the hand and tied off the bandage, and then she looked up at him at the direct and unsettling closeness of his eyes. At this range gray, she could see in this light the gray of mountain rock after rain. You were overdue, she said simply. The map was the practical next step. Most people would have waited, he said. I know, she said. I'm not most people. He was very still for a moment. Then he said, no, you're not. She stood and put the supplies away, and went back to the stove to check the pot, and the silence that followed was a different quality of silence than the ones before, fuller, somehow. More settled. The silence of two people who have just learned something about each other and are deciding what to do with it. Thank you, he said. She turned from the stove. He was still sitting at the table, looking at the bandaged hand with the expression of a man who is not accustomed to being looked after, and is in the process of figuring out how it sits with him. You'd do the same, she said. He looked up. I would, he said, and she believed him. The supply run happened on the last clear week of September, a 2-day ride down and back, and Silas made it alone while Mabel stayed at the cabin because someone had to stay. And the cabin, in an unattended state for 4 days in late September, was an invitation to every animal on the mountain to make itself at home. He left her with a list of what he was bringing back and instructions about the outer door latch that had a tendency to stick in cold weather, and she listened to all of it and then said, How long has that latch been sticking? Since last winter. I'll fix it while you're gone. He looked at her for a moment. I'll see you in 4 days. I'll be here, she said. She watched him ride out and then turned back to the cabin and started on the latch. She fixed the latch. She recocked the window on the north wall that let in a draft she had noticed on the 4th night. She reorganized the food stores based on the projected consumption schedule. She'd worked out placing the items with the shortest shelf life at the front. She found a hole in the roof of the storage lean-to, patched it with materials from the supply shelf, and stood in the cold for 45 minutes, making sure it would hold. On the second day, she found the box. It was on the high shelf above the fireplace behind the 3 worn books, pushed back far enough that you wouldn't find it without looking. She found it while she was cleaning the shelf, not looking for it, not looking for anything except what she was doing. A small wooden box, the kind you make yourself out of scrap lumber when you have time and no one to buy things for. She almost put it back without opening it. She opened it. Letters. A stack of them tied with a piece of rawhide, the paper gone soft with age and handling. The top one had been opened and folded and unfolded so many times the creases had gone thin. She did not read it. She would not read it. That was not a line she was going to cross. But she saw the handwriting, a woman's handwriting, and she saw the date on the top corner, and she did the arithmetic. 63. The winter of 63, which was 11 years ago, which was when Silas Crowe had come up this mountain alone, and not come back down to stay. She put the letters back exactly as she had found them. She put the box back on the shelf behind the books, pushed to the same distance from the front. She went back to work. But she thought about the letters for the rest of the day, and she thought about Silas saying a lot of things, none of them simple, and she thought about a man who kept letters in a box on a high shelf and had been alone for 11 years and had still eventually looked across a muddy street at a woman standing up without help and thought that one. She was still thinking about it when she heard the horses. Too soon. Silas wasn't due back until the 4th day, and this was only the 3rd, and there were 2 sets of hoofbeats, not one, and her body knew. Before her mind did that something was different, because she was already at the window, and then already at the door. 2 riders. One of them was Silas. She knew his seat. The particular way he carried his height on horseback, had learned it in 2 days on the trail, and filed it away without meaning to. The other was a man she didn't know. Younger by the look of him. Better dressed for a mountain setting, which meant he'd come prepared, or come before. They dismounted, and Silas came to the door, and he said without preamble, "We've got a situation." The younger man's name was Douglas Pratt. He was a land surveyor from Denver, he said, and he had papers, he said, and the papers pertained to a claim on a section of the mountain that included, he said, the property on which they were currently standing. He said all of this standing in the doorway of the cabin with his hat in his hands and his eyes moving around the interior in a way that struck Mabel as less professional and more calculating. "What kind of claim?" she said. Pratt looked at her, the specific look of a man who has addressed his remarks to another man and is recalibrating to discover the woman is the one asking the questions. "Mining rights," he said. "There's been a survey indicating mineral deposits on this section of the mountain. The company I represent has filed a claim under the—" "Which company?" Mabel said. Pratt blinked. "Consolidated Western Land and Mining." Mabel knew that name. She knew it the way she knew a face from a bad dream, not from direct experience, but from somewhere adjacent to it. The land office in Denver. The transfer of her father's property. The holding company that had appeared in the paperwork like a name on a door with no one behind it. "When was the claim filed?" she said. "Miss, when was it filed?" Pratt looked at Silas. Silas said nothing and kept his eyes on Pratt with the specific quality of attention that Mabel was coming to recognize, the attention of a man who has already made a decision and is waiting to see if the other person knows it yet. "6 weeks ago," Pratt said. "Before or after the survey?" Mabel said. Something shifted behind Pratt's eyes. "I'm not sure I understand the survey that found the mineral deposits," Mabel said. "Was the claim filed before or after the survey results came back?" The silence that followed was about 4 seconds long and told her everything. "I'll need to see those papers," she said. Pratt looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and produced a folded document and held it out, and she took it with both hands and opened it and stood in the doorway of the cabin on the side of a mountain in late September and read every word. She read it twice. Then she folded it and held it out to him. "The claim is dated September 3rd, she said. "The survey was completed September 19th. You filed the claim 2 weeks before your company had evidence there was anything to claim. She held his gaze. Where I come from, that's not a mining claim. That's a speculation. And speculations filed under false pretenses have a different name. Pratt took the papers. His expression had changed into something that was working hard to stay professional. Ma'am, the legality of the process is not something I'm in a position to. You're not in a position to discuss the legality, Mabel said, because the legality is the problem. Who sent you up here? I represent Consolidated Western. I heard you the first time, she said. Who specifically sent you? Pratt settled his hat back on his head. I think this is a conversation better had through proper legal channels, he said. I'll be in touch. He glanced at Silas, then at Mabel, then back at Silas with the expression of a man who came expecting a lone mountain man and found something he hadn't accounted for. He left. They listened to his horse until the sound of it disappeared. Then Silas said, You know that company. It wasn't a question. They took my father's farm, she said. The words sat in the air of the cabin. Silas looked at her for a long moment. Same company. Same company, she said. Different mountain. How was quiet for a long time. She could see him doing the calculation, not just the immediate practical calculation, of what the claim meant for his land and his cabin and his 11 years of work on this mountain, but the deeper, slower calculation of what it meant that she was here, that she had read those papers and known what they said, that the thing that had taken her farm had followed her, or she had followed it unknowingly, 2 days' ride up into the Rockies. What do we do? He said. She had not been asked that question. What do we do, you and I together, in so long that the weight of it caught her off guard? Not the question itself. The we. She took a breath. We find out who is actually behind Consolidated Western, she said. Because a company that files mining claims before its own survey results come back is a company that already knows what it's looking for. And a company that already knows what it's looking for either has someone on the inside of the land office or has done this before. Or both, Silas said. Or both, she agreed. He moved to the shelf. He pulled down the second of the 3 worn books. Not to read it, she saw, but because behind it, in the space between the book and the box she had found and replaced, there was a folded piece of paper she had not seen. He opened it and laid it on the table. It was a map. Not his hand-drawn trail maps, something different. Property lines. Claim boundaries. The mountain drawn in the formal language of a survey with measurements and markers and a grid she recognized from the paperwork at her father's land office. I had this drawn 3 years ago, he said, when the first surveyor came through. She looked at him. There was a first surveyor. 3 years ago, he said. He came, he looked, he left. Nothing happened. I thought... He stopped. I thought it was done. It was never done, Mabel said. They came back with a different approach. She looked at the map. Then she looked at him. Silas. The mineral deposits they're claiming, where on the mountain would they be? He put his finger on the map. Just north of the cabin. The section they had walked together on her 3rd day. The stretch of exposed rock, where the ground changed color in a way she had noticed and filed away and not yet asked about. She had walked over whatever they were coming for. All right, she said. She said it quietly. Not with fear, with the particular clarity of a woman who has been here before. Not on this mountain, not with this man, but in this exact situation, where something larger than her was trying to take what was real and what was earned using paper and process, and the assumption that the person on the other side didn't know enough to fight back. She knew enough. I'm going to need paper, she said. And I'm going to need you to tell me everything you remember about that first surveyor 3 years ago. What he said, what he asked, what he looked at. Silas found her paper. He sat across the table from her and told her everything he remembered, and she wrote it down in the careful, precise handwriting that Orson Hart had evaluated and found suitable, and then not given her the chance to use, and she asked questions when she needed clarification and didn't when she didn't, and the fire burned low, and neither of them noticed for a long time. Outside, the mountain went dark. The first snow of the season began to fall sometime after midnight. Soft, preliminary, the mountain's way of clearing its throat before what it actually had to say. It collected on the window ledge and on the roof and on the ground outside the door, where 2 sets of boot prints and 1 set of horse prints were slowly being covered over and erased. Inside, Mabel wrote. Silas read what she wrote and corrected what needed correcting and added what she'd missed, and they worked in the close warmth of the dying fire, like 2 people who had been doing this for years instead of weeks. And somewhere in that long night, without either of them marking the moment it happened, the cabin stopped being Silas Crowe's place where Mabel Hartwell was staying. It became something else, something that didn't have a name yet, but both of them could feel the shape of it. The snow that started after midnight did not stop. Mabel knew it before she opened her eyes the next morning, knew it from the quality of the silence, the way sound behaves differently when the world outside has been muffled under several inches of white. She had grown up with that silence. It was the silence of a farm in winter, the silence that meant work was about to get harder, and the margin for error was about to get thinner. She got up before Silas. She had the fire rebuilt and the coffee on by the time he came out of the back room, and he stopped in the doorway and looked at her, and then looked at the fire, and then looked at the window where the snow was still coming down in the steady, purposeful way that meant it had been doing this for hours and intended to keep doing it. How much, he said. 8 inches on the sill, she said. Still falling. He was quiet for a moment. The northern trap line. You can't go out in this. The traps. We'll still be there when it stops, she said. Sit down. Drink your coffee. He looked at her. She looked back. He sat down and drank his coffee. That was the first time she had told Silas Crowe what to do, and had him do it, and neither of them commented on it, but it sat between them in the warm air of the cabin, like a fact that had just been established solid as a fence post driven into good ground. She poured her own cup and sat across from him and pulled the notes from the night before to the center of the table. She had been thinking about Douglas Pratt since she woke, turning the problem over in the way she turned all serious problems, not frantically, not anxiously, but with the patient, deliberate attention of someone who knows that solutions exist and are findable if you look in the right places with the right tools. The claim date, she said. September 3rd. That's not random. Silas looked at her over his cup. What do you mean? September 3rd is 3 days before the start of the federal filing period for mineral claims in this territory, she said. Whoever filed that claim knew the window was opening. They filed early to establish priority before anyone else could file on the same section. Which means they knew about the deposits before the survey, Silas said. Which means the survey wasn't how they found out, Mabel said. Someone told them. Someone who had already been up here. She looked at him. 3 years ago. Silas set his cup down. The first surveyor, he said. What was his name? Silas thought about it. He was the kind of man who remembered things accurately and didn't embroider them, and she had learned to trust what he said with the specific confidence you develop in a person who doesn't speak unless they mean it. Garfield, he said. R.T. Garfield. He had papers from the Territorial Land Office. Looked legitimate. Did you keep any of those papers? Silas stood without answering and went to the back room. She heard him moving things, the specific sound of a man looking through things he doesn't look through often. He came back with a folded paper and set it on the table in front of her. She opened it. R.T. Garfield Independent Survey, commissioned by the Territorial Land Assessment Office, Denver, Colorado. A seal that looked official. A signature she couldn't read. A date, October 3 years prior. She looked at the commission number in the upper right corner. Then she looked at the claim papers Douglas Pratt had shown her yesterday, which she had not given back because he had not asked for them back and she had not offered. She pulled them from her coat pocket where she had put them and unfolded them on the table beside the survey commission. The commission numbers were different formats. Pratt's papers used a sequence she recognized from the Denver Land Office. She had spent 60 days fighting those offices, and she knew their numbering, like she knew her own handwriting. Garfield's commission used a different format entirely. This commission, she said, putting her finger on Garfield's paper, didn't come from the Territorial Land Office. Silas leaned in and looked. How do you know? Because I spent 2 months dealing with the Territorial Land Office over my father's farm, she said. Their commission numbers have a prefix, 2 letters, then a dash, then 6 digits. This, She tapped Garfield's paper. Has no prefix, just numbers, 7 of them. Silas was very still. Garfield worked for Consolidated Western, she said. He came here 3 years ago, identified the deposits, filed a private report, and then Consolidated Western waited. Waited for the right moment for the federal filing window to open for... She stopped. Thought. For the right circumstances. What circumstances? Silas said. That's what I don't know yet, she said. She said it calmly, which was how she said things she intended to find out. The snow stopped by early afternoon and left behind the kind of quiet that feels like the mountain exhaling. Silas went out to check the closest trap line, the eastern one, an hour out and back, and Mabel reorganized everything she knew onto a fresh sheet of paper in 2 columns. What they could prove. What they suspected but couldn't prove yet. She stared at the second column for a long time. Then she wrote a name at the bottom of it in letters she pressed harder than necessary. Consolidated Western Land and Mining. She had started to write something else below it when the sound of the door made her look up. Silas came in faster than his usual pace. She knew immediately, not from his face, which he kept controlled the way he kept most things controlled, but from the pace itself, the particular speed of a man who has seen something that has changed the calculation. There's a second camp, he said. Half a mile east, 2 men. Equipment I don't recognize. Crates, a tripod, something covered under canvas. Mabel was already standing. How long have they been there? Judging by how settled in they look, he said, at least 2 days. She did the arithmetic. They arrived before Pratt, before the first snow, before he came to the cabin with his hat in his hands and his papers and his careful language. They were already positioned before the conversation happened. They weren't waiting for our answer, she said. No, Silas said. They weren't. They were waiting for us to be distracted by the conversation, she said. Silas looked at her for a moment, with an expression she was learning to read, the expression he had when she had arrived somewhere he had been heading and gotten there first. While we were dealing with Pratt. They were setting up whatever is under that canvas, she said. Silas, what's directly east of that camp? He went to his hand-drawn maps without hesitation. Found the eastern section, put his finger on it. The section he pointed to was where the rock changed color. The same section as on Pratt's survey papers. She looked at him. They're not filing a claim, she said. They're already extracting. The words sat in the room like a stone dropped in still water. If they extract before any legal challenge can be filed, she said, thinking out loud now, the words coming as fast as the thoughts. Then the claim dispute becomes irrelevant, because what they came for is already gone. The mountain doesn't give back what's been taken out of it. How long would that take? Silas said. Depends on what they're after and how much of it there is, she said. But if they've had teams positioned and a surveyor who identified the site 3 years ago, they know exactly where to dig and how deep. She looked at the map. Days maybe. A week at most. Silas was quiet for one long moment. Then he said, What do we do? And there it was again, that clean and unreserved. We, and she felt it land in the same place it had landed the night before, the place that had been empty a long time. We go to their camp, she said. He looked at her. Not with weapons, she said. With paper. With Pratt's claim documents, with Garfield's false commission, with the supply ledger that shows when you established continuous occupancy on this land. She began gathering papers from the table. Silas, you've been living on this mountain continuously for 11 years. That's prior occupancy. It doesn't erase a mineral claim, but it complicates it enormously, and they know that, which is why they came to talk first, instead of just digging. They came to talk to see if I knew enough to fight it, he said. And then they saw me, she said. He looked at her steadily. And then they saw you, he said. She put the papers in order. Then she looked up at him. Before we go, I need you to understand something. This company. What they did to my father's farm. What they're trying to do here, it's the same machine. Different parts, same gears. They find land with value. They use paperwork and process, and the assumption that the person on the other side doesn't know enough to stop them. She held his gaze. I know enough. I know you do, he said, without hesitation, without qualification. She took a breath. Let's go. They rode east into the white and silent aftermath of the storm, and Mabel kept the papers inside her coat, where her body heat would keep them dry. And she thought about her father signing something he didn't understand in an office in Denver, and the land walking out from under his family, like the ground itself had decided to leave, and she held that thought not with grief, but with the cold, clean anger that grief becomes when you've had long enough to work with it. The camp was exactly where Silas said, half a mile east. 2 men. The equipment under canvas that she could now see was a drilling rig in partial assembly, not large but efficient, the kind designed for a specific depth at a specific location by someone who already knew exactly what they were looking for. The 2 men looked up when they rode in. One of them, older, the one with the look of someone in charge, said, "This is a restricted work site." "It's his land," Mabel said. She did not get off her horse. She looked down at the man with the specific calm of someone holding better cards than the other player knows about. "Silas Crowe has maintained continuous occupancy of this section for 11 years. I have his supply records, his occupancy documentation, and your company's claim filing, which was dated 2 weeks before your own survey was completed." She let that land. "I also have the commission papers from your surveyor R.T. Garfield, who visited this property 3 years ago under a false commission from a company that does not exist." The older man's expression shifted. Not dramatically, but she saw it. "Ma'am, false commission from a company that does not exist." The older man's expression shifted. Not dramatically, but she saw it. "Ma'am, I'm not in a position to discuss." "You're not in a position to continue drilling on this site," she said. "Not legally. And if you do, every shovelful of material you remove constitutes theft from land under prior occupancy claim, which is a federal matter, not a territorial one." She reached into her coat and produced the papers. "I've documented everything. The dates, the discrepancies, the false commission, the premature filing. I've written it in the kind of detail that a federal land court will find very easy to follow." She held the papers out. The older man did not take them. "You'll want to read them," she said. "Because right now you're employees following orders. If you keep drilling, you become participants in a fraudulent land seizure. The men who gave you the orders will settle with the company's money. You'll settle with your freedom." Silence. The second man, younger, who had not spoken, looked at the older one. The older man looked at Mabel. Then he looked at Silas, who had not said a word through any of this, who sat on his horse in the cold mountain air, with his jaw set and his eyes doing what his eyes did, watching, measuring, already at the conclusion. "We'll stop for today," the older man said, "while I send word to—" "Send whatever word you need to send," Mabel said. "We'll be filing our formal objection to the claim with the Federal Land Office in Denver within 10 days. Anyone who'd like to be on the right side of that document has a limited window." She turned her horse. Silas turned with her. They rode back to the cabin without speaking, and the cold was clean and sharp, and the mountain was enormous on all sides of them, and Mabel kept her spine straight and her hands easy on the reins, and felt the particular sensation of a fight well started, not won, not over, but entered on solid ground. When they got back, she tied her horse and went inside and sat at the table, and her hands were shaking. Not from fear. She recognized the distinction. From the sustained effort of holding everything together at exactly the right tension for exactly the right amount of time. The controlled burn of it, and the release that comes when you can finally set it down. She pressed her palms flat on the table. Breathed. Silas came in behind her. He saw the hands. He didn't say anything about them. He went to the stove and put more wood on the fire, and then he sat across from her and put his own hands on the table, big and scarred and steady. "You scared them," he said. "I gave them information," she said. Fear was their response to it. "Mabel." She looked at him. That was— He stopped, started over, which she was learning was what he did when what he wanted to say was something he didn't have a practiced version of. "I have been on this mountain for 11 years. I have dealt with surveyors and land agents and men who thought isolated meant unprotected." He held her gaze. "Nobody has ever walked into a situation like that and taken it apart the way you just did." She was quiet for a moment. I've been fighting versions of that fight for 2 years, she said. I just lost the first time. You didn't lose, he said. You lost a battle you didn't have enough information to win. That's different. She looked at him. That's a generous interpretation. It's the accurate one, he said. The fire settled in the grate. Outside the light was going, and the temperature was dropping again, the mountain reasserting its priorities after the brief interruption of human drama. We need to get those documents to Denver, she said, before they can mount a counter-response. I know someone in Denver, Silas said. A lawyer. Used him once years ago for a boundary dispute with the neighboring claim. He's honest, which up here is rarer than silver. What's his name? Walt Greer, office on Larimer Street. He paused. He'll take the case if it's as solid as what you described. It's solid, she said. But I need 2 more things. I need the original deed to this land if you have it, and I need to know if Garfield or anyone from Consolidated Western ever put anything in writing to you directly. Any communication at all. Silas went to the back room again. He came back with a tin box this time, not the wooden one from the high shelf. He set it on the table and opened it, and it held exactly what she needed. The original land deed dated 15 years back, filed in the proper federal format with the proper prefix numbers she now knew to look for. And beneath it, a single letter, 1 page, signed with a name she didn't recognize, but postmarked Denver, offering to purchase the land at a price that was, she calculated immediately, roughly a third of what it was actually worth, given what was in the ground beneath it. When did this come? She said. 2 years ago, he said. I didn't respond. They took that as a no and changed their strategy, she said. From purchase to claim. She looked at the letter. This is evidence of intent. They knew what the land was worth. They tried to buy it cheap, couldn't, and then manufactured a legal mechanism to take it. Same thing they did to your father, Silas said quietly. Same thing, she said. Except this time, they came to a mountain. She looked up from the papers and found him watching her with that look she had catalogued and still hadn't fully named. Not admiration, exactly. Not gratitude. Something older and quieter than either. Something that had to do with recognition on a level that didn't have a simple word. And this time, he said, they found you. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, we should start drafting the formal objection tonight. If we ride out day after tomorrow, we can be in Denver in 4 days. Together, he said. She looked at him. The filing requires the landowner's signature, she said. And I know the offices. She paused. And yes, together. He nodded once. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward her and picked up the pencil. The wind picked up outside, moving around the corners of the cabin with the particular voice that mountain wind develops in October, not threatening, yet not the full winter voice, but practicing, getting ready. They worked through the evening side by side. Silas reading from documents and Mabel drafting the formal language, and she asked him questions, and he answered them with the precision of a man who had spent 11 years paying close attention to his own land. And she built the argument piece by piece, the way she had watched her father build fence post by post, wire by wire, nothing left loose. Around midnight, Silas said, you should sleep. So should you, she said. I'm used to not sleeping. So am I, she said. That doesn't mean it's good for either of us. She set down the pencil. 2 more hours. Then we sleep. We need to be sharp when we ride out, and sharper when we get to Denver. He looked at her. You've done this before. The not sleeping, keeping going thing. Farm emergencies don't happen during business hours, she said. He almost smiled again. That corner of the mouth thing that was almost a smile. She was becoming something like a collector of those small expressions, cataloging them, marking when they appeared, and why learning the geography of a face that had spent years giving almost nothing away. Mabel, he said. Why didn't you fight harder for the farm? He said it carefully, not as accusation, as genuine question. You clearly had the capacity, the knowledge. You could have. I didn't have what I have now, she said. Which is... She looked at him across the table, at the papers between them, at the tin box with its deed and its damning letter. At the 11 years of supply records in her own handwriting that told the story of a man who had been here continuously and unambiguously for longer than Consolidated Western had known this mountain existed. Enough, she said. I didn't have enough. Enough information, enough documentation, enough. She paused. Enough standing. You go into a fight like that alone, and they look through you. You go in with legitimate occupancy, proper paperwork, and someone who knows every inch of the land in question. She stopped. Someone who has standing, he said. Yes. I was quiet for a moment. You have standing here, he said. Whatever happens with the legal claim, you have standing on this mountain. She looked at him. He was not a man who said things he didn't mean. She had learned that quickly and trusted it absolutely. When Silas Crowe said something, it was because he had decided it was true. She said, "Thank you." He nodded, looked back at the papers. They worked for 2 more hours. Then the fire burned low, and they banked it for the night, and she went to her room and lay on the narrow bed and looked at the ceiling and felt beneath the exhaustion and the urgency and the ongoing arithmetic of the fight ahead. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt like someone was on her side, not because she needed someone on her side to stand up. She had proven repeatedly and in detail that she could stand up without it. But there was a difference, she understood it now in her bones, in a way she hadn't understood it before, between standing alone, because that's what the situation required, and standing with someone because they had looked at everything you were and decided to stand there. The difference was not weakness and strength. The difference was alone, you survive. Together, you might actually win. She was still thinking of that when she fell asleep. The ride to Denver started 2 days later in clear, cold weather that the mountain provided like a reluctant gift. The sky so blue it looked painted, and the air thin and sharp and honest. They rode mostly in silence, the first day. The comfortable silence she had come to recognize as their particular language for traveling together. A silence that wasn't empty, but full of shared purpose, shared attention. The occasional exchange of information, when information was what was needed. At midday, they stopped by a creek to water the horses and eat. And Mabel was going over the documents one more time. She had read them so many times, she nearly had them memorized, which was the point when Silas said, from where he was standing at the creek bank, watching the horses drink. The first surveyor came in October. She looked up. 3 years ago, he said. October. He was here for 4 days. He was very interested in the northeast section. The same section the camp was on, she said. Yes. He paused. He also asked about whether I had family coming, whether anyone was due to visit, whether I was expecting anyone over the winter. She was very still. He was assessing whether you were alone. I answered yes to everything, Silas said. Because it was true, and because I didn't think it mattered. It mattered, she said. They specifically targeted land where the occupant was isolated, alone. No family, no connections, no one to help build a legal defense. She looked at her papers. They did the same thing to my father. He was alone after my mother died. That's when the loan terms changed. That's when the holding company appeared. She looked up. Silas, this isn't opportunistic. It's a pattern. He turned from the creek and looked at her. They look for isolated people, she said. People without networks, without witnesses, without someone to say, I was there, I saw it, here is what actually happened. Her voice was steady, but something behind it was not. Something behind it was the anger that had been building since February, since the land office in Denver, since the letter that said the terms have adjusted in language smooth as a con man's handshake. They are a machine built to take from people who have no one to help them hold on. Until now, Silas said. She looked at him. Until you showed up, he said. He said it simply without drama, the way he said everything that mattered. Neither of us was going to beat this alone. I didn't have the knowledge. You didn't have the standing. He held her gaze. But together we have both, she said. Yes, he said. They looked at each other across the creek bank in the cold October light. Two people who had arrived at the same mountain by entirely different roads and found at the point where those roads crossed exactly what neither of them had known they were missing. Then Mabel folded the papers back into her coat and stood up and said, "We should keep moving if we want to make the lower camp before dark." And Silas said, "Agreed." And they mounted and rode south, and the mountain watched them go, the way mountains watch everything, with the vast, indifferent, ancient attention of something that has seen much longer stories than theirs, and is entirely willing to see how this one ends. 3 days later, they rode into Denver, and Walter Greer's office on Larimer Street was on the second floor of a building that smelled of paper and coal smoke. And when they walked in, Mabel with her documents, and Silas with his deed, and his 11 years of continuous occupancy, and the letter offering to buy what they'd already planned to take. The lawyer looked up from his desk, and then looked again. The way a man looks when he has been doing this long enough to know immediately when something real has just walked through his door. "Silas Crowe," he said. "Walt," Silas said. "This is Mabel Hartwell. She's going to do most of the talking." Walt Greer looked at Mabel. Mabel set the documents on his desk. "Read the claim date first," she said. "Then the survey date. Then the commission numbers on Garfield's papers." She sat down across from him and folded her hands. "Then tell me what you can do." Walter Greer read. He read for a long time without speaking, which was exactly what she had hoped for, because the silence of a man reading carefully is very different from the silence of a man deciding how to say no, and she had learned to tell the difference. When he finally set the papers down, he looked at her over the top of them with the expression of a man who has just found something he has been looking for in an unlikely place. "Where did you get your legal training?" he said. "A land office in Denver," she said. 60 days, the hard way." He almost smiled. "The commission numbers are the key," he said. "Garfield's false commission invalidates the entire chain of discovery. If they discovered the deposits under a fraudulent commission, the discovery itself is tainted, which means the claim is tainted, which means—" "The filing is void," Mabel said. "The filing is void," Walter Greer confirmed. He looked at Silas. "And you have 11 years of documented occupancy." "She documented it," Silas said. Greer looked back at Mabel. "How long have you been on the mountain?" 6 weeks, she said. He looked at her for a moment. 6 weeks, he said. "The records were already there," she said. "I just put them in order." Walter Greer picked up the papers again. Then he said, "I'll file the formal objection tomorrow morning, first thing, before they can make any counter moves." He looked up. "This is going to be a fight. Consolidated Western has money and lawyers, and they are not going to let this go quietly." "I know," Mabel said. "You understand what you're taking on." She looked at him steadily. "I took on my first Consolidated Western office 2 years ago," she said. "I lost because I was alone and I didn't have enough. Now I have enough." She held his gaze. "File the objection, Mr. Greer." He nodded. Then he said quietly, "Miss Hartwell, for what it's worth, I've been practicing law in this territory for 20 years. I have seen this company operate before. I have seen what they do to people who are alone and isolated and don't know enough to fight back." He paused. "I am very glad you know enough." Mabel said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "So am I." She stood, and Silas stood with her, and they walked out of Walter Greer's office onto Larimer Street in the cold October afternoon, and the city of Denver moved around them in its ordinary way, utterly indifferent to the fact that something had just shifted on a mountain 2 days north of it. Silas stood beside her on the boardwalk. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. They were quiet for a moment, standing in the noise and movement of the city. Two people from mountain who had ridden down to fight something larger than themselves with the only weapons that actually worked against it, truth on paper in order with dates that matched and numbers that held up. "Are you hungry?" he said. She realized suddenly that she was. Genuinely, completely hungry, the first time in days that her body had relaxed enough to remember its own needs. "Yes," she said. "There's a place on the next block," he said. "Nothing fancy." "I don't need fancy," she said. He almost smiled. That corner of his mouth. She caught it. "No," he said. "I know you don't." They walked down Larimer Street in the October light, and the fight was not over. It was barely started, and they both knew it, but the ground under it was solid, and they had built it solid themselves, and that was something. That was in fact everything. Walter Greer filed the formal objection at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday before the land office had fully opened its doors, because Mabel had told him that the window between their filing and Consolidated Western's awareness of it was the most valuable window they had, and Walter Greer, who had been practicing law long enough to know that timing was half the battle, had agreed without argument. They were back on the mountain by Friday. The camp to the east was gone. Not packed up and moved, gone. The way things go when someone has received word that the ground has shifted legally and decided that discretion is the better part of avoiding a federal fraud charge. The tripod, the crates, the canvas-covered drilling rig, the 2 men, all of it gone, leaving behind nothing but the flattened ground where the equipment had stood and a scattering of boot prints already going soft in the edge of a new dusting of snow. Silas stood and looked at the empty camp for a long moment. "They moved fast," he said. "They've done this before," Mabel said. "They know when to hold and when to fold." "Does that mean it's over?" She looked at him. "It means this round is over," she said. "Consolidated Western doesn't give up. They regroup, find a different angle, try again with a cleaner filing or a different legal mechanism." She looked at the flattened ground. "But Greer has our objection on record now. The false commission is documented. Every move they make from here has to work around what we've already established." "Which makes it harder," he said. "Which makes it a fair fight," she said. For the first time. I was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's all you wanted, a fair fight." "That's all anybody wants," she said. "Most people just never get one." They rode back to the cabin in the thin November light, and Mabel went inside and took off her coat and stood by the stove and let herself feel for the first time in weeks something that was not urgency, not the constant forward pressure of the fight, the next document, the next calculation, the next move. Just the solid, quiet reality of being back in a place that had started to feel against all odds and in ways she hadn't expected, like somewhere she belonged. She was still standing there when Silas came in from settling the horses. He stopped in the doorway and looked at her. "You all right?" "I'm trying to remember what I do when there isn't an emergency," she said. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. "I'll let you know if I figure it out," he said. That was the beginning of November, and November on that mountain was a different country from October. October had been the mountain testing them. The early snow, the wind, the accelerating cold that came on fast and meant business. November was the mountain having made up its mind. The temperature dropped in the first week and kept dropping, and the snow came in the kind of consistent, purposeful waves that meant it had no intention of stopping before April, and the world contracted down to the cabin. The immediate surroundings, the trap lines that Silas ran, and the fire that Mabel kept, and the 1,000 daily details of surviving comfortably rather than merely surviving. She had not expected to find contentment in it. She had expected to find it manageable, which was her standard for most things. Manageable was what you aimed for when comfort seemed like too much to ask. But something about the stripped-down clarity of mountain winter, the way everything unnecessary fell away, and what remained was only what actually mattered, suited something in her that had never been suited by the complicated social geometry of town life. Here what she did was what counted. Full stop. No qualifications. No presentation, no impression, no performing for an audience that had already decided what they thought of her. The fire either stayed lit or it didn't. The food either stretched or it didn't. The supply calculations either held or they didn't. They held. She realized somewhere in the second week of November that she was happy. Not the fragile, conditional happiness of circumstances going temporarily well, but something more durable. The happiness of being in right relationship with your own life, of doing what you were built for in a place that valued what you could do. It was a new feeling. She sat with it carefully, the way you sit with new feelings when you've been disappointed enough times to be cautious about them. Silas noticed. He noticed the way he noticed everything quietly without comment, filing it away. But she could see it in the way he watched her sometimes across the cabin. A particular quality of attention that was different from the practical watch of a man assessing a working partner. Something that was paying attention to her not as a function, but as a person. She did not ask him about it. She was working up to asking him about it. The question she was working up to was not about the watching. The question was about the box on the high shelf. The letters tied with rawhide that she had found and replaced, and not spoken of, and had thought about every day since. She was not sure she had the right to ask. She was not sure she had the right not to either, because whatever was in that box was the reason 11 years had passed, and Silas Crowe had spoken to no one, and trusted no one, and built his life in a place where the nearest neighbor was a 2-hour ride in solitude, was not a condition, but a decision made once held to, until a woman fell in the mud on a market day in Red Hollow, and got up without looking for help. She was thinking about this one evening in the 3rd week of November, when he came in from the trapline early. She looked up. He was in before midday, which was not usual. "Everything all right?" "Trapline's clear," he said. He set his pack down, stood for a moment in the middle of the room with the particular stance of a man who has decided to do something and is in the narrow space between deciding and doing. "I want to show you something." She waited. He went to the high shelf. He took down the wooden box. He set it on the table between them. Her hands were very still in her lap. "You found it," he said. Not accusatory, just accurate. "I was cleaning the shelf," she said. "I opened it and then I closed it. I didn't read anything." "I know," he said. "I could tell." He looked at the box for a moment. "Her name was Rose. We were going to be married in the spring of '63. He said it straight without embellishment, the way he said everything that cost him something. "She died in January. Fever. Same as your mother, I suppose, the kind that comes in fast, and doesn't leave any room for a doctor to get there in time." Mabel said nothing. "I came up the mountain in February," he said. "I told myself it was for the winter, and then winter ended, and I was still here, and it turned out that being here, being removed from everything that reminded me of what I'd lost. It was the only way I could figure out how to keep going." "So you stayed," she said quietly. "So I stayed," he said. 11 years of staying." He looked at the box. "I don't talk about it. I don't—" He stopped. "I don't let people in. Haven't since then. Not because I decided not to. Just because nobody made me want to." She understood what he was not saying directly, and she held it very carefully. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I want you to know that. Whatever you're telling me, I'm not receiving it as an obligation." He looked at her. "I know that," he said. "That's why I'm telling you." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had picked up and was doing its November thing around the corners of the cabin. "She would have liked you," he said. Then he seemed surprised that he had said it the way a person is surprised when the truest thing comes out before they had planned it to. Mabel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me about her." He looked at her. "Not if you don't want to," she said. "But it seems to me that carrying something alone for 11 years is a long time, and sometimes the kindest thing one person can do for another is ask them to set part of it down." He was very still for a moment. Then he told her about Rose. He talked for a long time, longer than she had ever heard him talk about anything. He talked about the farm. They had planned the particular kind of woman she had been, the way she laughed at things other people didn't find funny, and was completely unapologetic about it. He talked about the winter he had found her already too far gone, and the January that had been the longest month of his life, and the February he had come up the mountain, because at a certain point surviving requires you to change the terrain. Mabel listened. She did not fill silences with comfort. She did not offer the standard phrases that people offer in the face of grief, because she had received enough of them to know they were for the speaker more than the listener. She listened the way she did everything, completely with her full attention, giving what he was saying the dignity of being genuinely heard. When he finished, he looked at his hands. "I haven't said her name out loud," he said, "in about 6 years. Rose," Mabel said. He looked up. "It's a good name," she said. "She deserves to have it said." He looked at her for a long time. And then something happened on his face that she had not seen there before. Not the almost smile, not the careful expression of a man guarding something, but something that was open in the way of a thing that has been closed a long time and has finally found the conditions under which it can afford to open. She did not look away. Neither did he. "Mabel," he said. "I know," she said, because she did know. She had been knowing it for a while, the way you know things that are large and true, not all at once, but incrementally, each piece arriving and settling until the whole shape of it was clear. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I used to know. I've forgotten most of it. I've never known how," she said honestly. "Every man I ever encountered in the context of this looked at me and saw what I wasn't instead of what I was." She held his gaze. "You've never done that. Not once. Not from the first day. Because what you are," he said, "is the most." He stopped. Looked for the word and couldn't find it, which she understood, because she couldn't find it either. The word that meant competent and strong and real, and also somehow the specific kind of beautiful that has nothing to do with what people usually mean when they use that word, the kind that comes from a person being entirely and unapologetically themselves. "I don't have the word," he said. "You don't need the word," she said. "I know what you mean." He reached across the table. Not for her hand, he didn't reach for her hand, with the reaching intention of a man doing a romantic gesture. He reached across and covered her hand with his, the way you cover something you want to keep from going anywhere, the way you put your hand on a door in a wind. Solid, purposeful, real. She turned her hand over and held his back. They stayed like that for a while in the firelight in the wind on the mountain, and it was not dramatic, and it was not elaborate, and it was exactly what it needed to be. The knock on the door came 3 days later. She heard it before Silas did. She was awake before him as usual already at the stove, and she registered it with the immediate alertness that 4 weeks on a mountain had developed in her, the awareness that a knock on this door this far up was never ordinary. She opened it. Douglas Pratt. Not with his hat in his hands this time. With a coat that cost more than she had owned in the previous year, and a man beside him she didn't recognize, older, dressed for a city, with the bearing of a man who was accustomed to being the most important person in whatever room he entered. "Miss Hartwell," Pratt said. "This is Mr. Aldous Crane. He's the Regional Director of Consolidated Western Land and Mining." Aldous Crane looked at her with the appraising eyes of a man who specialized in assessing what things were worth and what it would cost to acquire them. "May we come in?" "No," she said. Crane blinked. People did not say no to Aldous Crane in doorways. "I beg your pardon." "You can speak from there," she said. "Mr. Crowe's property line begins at the gate you rode through. You're already further onto it than I'm comfortable with given your company's history with this land." Crane looked at Pratt. Pratt looked at his boots. "Miss Hartwell," Crane said, and his voice had shifted into the register of a man deploying patience as a weapon. "I think if we could sit down like reasonable people—" "I'm perfectly reasonable standing up," she said. "What do you want?" Crane reached into his coat and produced an envelope. "A settlement offer," he said. "Consolidated Western is prepared to be generous. Given the complications that have arisen with the original claim filing, we're prepared to offer Mr. Crowe a substantial sum for the mineral rights without requiring him to vacate the property. He keeps the land and the cabin. We access the mineral deposits through a licensed agreement." She looked at the envelope. Did not take it. "How substantial?" she said. Crane named a number. It was, she had to admit, a real number. Not the insulting lowball of the letter 2 years ago. A real number, the kind that had been calculated by someone who knew what the deposits were worth and was willing to pay a portion of that worth in order to avoid the legal fight. She looked at the envelope for exactly as long as it took her to understand what taking it would mean. "No," she said. Crane's composure cracked just at the edges. "Miss Hartwell, I'd encourage you to consider." "I have considered," she said. "If we take that money, we establish that your company's claim process was legitimate enough to negotiate around. We validate the mechanism." She held his gaze. "Your company used a false commission to conduct an illegal survey on this land. That survey is the foundation of your claim. If we settle, that foundation stays in place. You've used it once, you can use the process again on this land or someone else's. This offer is specifically regarding this land. Your company's practices are not specific to this land," she said. "They used the same mechanism on my father's farm in eastern Colorado. They identified isolated property owners, used fraudulent processes to build paper claims, and relied on those owners not knowing enough to challenge them. She kept her voice level and clear. We are challenging them. And the settlement we're interested in is not money. It's a formal acknowledgement that the claim was filed under fraudulent pretenses and a legal agreement that bars Consolidated Western from refiling any claim on this property under any mechanism. Crane stared at her. In writing, she said. Witnessed and filed with the Federal Land Office. Silas appeared in the doorway behind her. She had not heard him get up, but he was there, not pushing in front of her, not taking over, just standing behind her, the way a mountain stands behind something solid and present and entirely committed. Crane looked at Silas, then at Mabel, then back. That's not a settlement, Crane said. That's a surrender. It's accurate, Mabel said. Which I realize feels similar from where you're standing. Crane was quiet for a long moment. She watched him doing the arithmetic, the legal fight which Walter Greer had apparently already indicated would be costly and winnable on their side against the settlement which required him to admit in writing that his company had broken the law. You're asking us to incriminate ourselves, he said. I'm asking your company to take responsibility for what it did, she said. Those are different things when you've actually done nothing wrong. They feel the same when you have. Crane looked at Pratt again. Pratt had the expression of a man who had known this visit was not going to go the way his employer expected. I'll need to consult with our legal team, Crane said. Of course, Mabel said. Mr. Greer's office is on Larimer Street in Denver. He'll be available to receive your response. She paused. Take your time. We have the objection on record. The longer this sits, the more difficult your position becomes. Crane put the envelope back in his coat. He turned and walked to his horse without another word. Pratt followed, and she noticed that he glanced back once, just once, with an expression that was, if she was reading it correctly, something close to respect. She closed the door. She stood with her back against it for a moment. Behind her, she heard Silas say quietly, You knew he'd say no to the acknowledgement. I knew he needed to hear that we knew what they'd done, she said. The settlement was never the point. The point was to establish that we're not fighting to protect one piece of land. We're fighting the mechanism. She turned. If Greer can build a case around the fraudulent commission, not just here, but as a pattern across multiple properties, it doesn't just protect this mountain. It stops them from doing it to anyone else. Silas looked at her for a long moment. My father's farm, he said. And however many others we can document, she said. Greer thinks we can get 2 more property owners with similar claims to join the challenge. If we can demonstrate a pattern. It becomes a federal matter, Silas said. Yes. He was quiet. This is bigger than the mountain, he said. It always was, she said. I just needed the mountain to see it from. He looked at her with that open expression that she was still getting used to the one that cost him something, and he paid willingly. Mabel, he said. What you just did at that door. She waited. Nobody. He stopped, started over. I have watched a lot of people come up against things larger than themselves. Most of them fold or fight without knowing why they're fighting. He shook his head slightly. You knew exactly why. Every word was the right word. I've had a long time to think about what I'd say if I ever got the chance, she said. Is that all it was? He said. Practice. She looked at him. No, she said. It was also anger. And it was also... She stopped. It was also knowing that what happens here matters. Not just to us. To my father, even though he's gone. To every person they've done this to who didn't have the information or the standing to fight back. She held his gaze. I am fighting for all of them. I'm just fighting from here. He crossed the room in 3 steps. He was not a man who moved that decisively about small things. He stood in front of her and put his hands on either side of her face, large, scarred, careful, and he looked at her, the way he looked at everything that mattered to him with the full and complete and unguarded attention that he gave to very few things in the world. You are, he said quietly, the most remarkable person I have ever known. She looked back at him, and she did not deflect it, and she did not minimize it, And she did not make a practical joke of it, the way she sometimes made practical jokes of things that moved her too much. She let it land. She let it be true. "You're not so unremarkable yourself," she said. He almost smiled. Then he actually smiled, not the corner of the mouth, not the almost, but the real thing, the full thing, and it changed his whole face into something that she wanted to memorize, because she understood it was rare, and she intended to be one of the few people who ever saw it. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his collarbone, and he put his arms around her, and they stood in the middle of the cabin on the mountain in the November cold and held on to each other with the specific intention of two people who have been alone a long time and have found against reasonable odds someone worth holding. Outside, the wind moved around the cabin. The fire held its warmth. The mountain stood where it had always stood. 3 weeks later, the letter came. It came with a rider from Greer's office, a young man on a fast horse, who made the 2-day ride in a day and a half, because Greer had told him it was urgent, and it arrived on a Tuesday morning when the temperature was the coldest it had been yet, and the sky had the white flat quality of impending heavy snow. Mabel read it at the table. She read it twice. Then she set it down carefully, with the deliberateness of someone handling something they want to make sure they are understanding correctly. "Greer found 2 more, she said. Silas looked up from the gear he was repairing. 2 more property owners, she said. Same mechanism. False commission, premature filing, isolation targeting. 1 in Wyoming territory, 1 in New Mexico. Both fought it alone and lost. She looked up. Both are willing to join the challenge. Silas was very still. With 3 documented cases using the same fraudulent process, she said. Greer can file a federal complaint, not just against the claim on this property, against Consolidated Western's operating practices as a company. She held this letter. If the federal court finds in our favor, they can't use the mechanism again, Silas said. They can't use it again, she said. Not here, not in Wyoming, not in New Mexico, not anywhere in the territory. She set the letter down. And the 2 property owners who lost, there's a legal pathway to review their cases. Silas put down the gear. He stood up. He walked to the table and picked up the letter and read it himself, and she watched his face while he read. Watched the slow, careful comprehension of a man who had spent 11 years winning small daily battles against a mountain and had never expected to win something this large. He set the letter down. He looked at her. You did this, he said. Greer did the filing, she said. Mabel, we did this, she said. You had 11 years of documented occupancy. I had the knowledge of how they operate. Greer had the legal mechanism. She held his gaze. None of it works without all of it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, There's something I made you. He said it abruptly, the way he said things that were outside his comfort zone, directly, without preamble, because he had no available preamble for it. She looked at him. I went to the back room. She heard him moving things. He came back carrying something wrapped in canvas, not large, something that fit under one arm. He set it on the table and pulled the canvas back. A chair. Not elaborate. He was not a man who did elaborate, and she wouldn't have wanted elaborate. A solid, beautiful, functional chair, built from the mountain pine that he had been working in the evenings when she thought he was repairing equipment. The seat was wide, and the arms were set at exactly the right height, and there was a curve to the back that she understood. The moment she looked at it had been shaped specifically for how she sat. The slight forward lean she brought to work, the way she rested her forearms on the table, the posture of a person who approaches what is in front of them with their whole body engaged. He had been watching how she sat. He had built something for how she actually was, not how he wished she would be. She could not speak for a moment. It's not, he started. Don't you dare say it's not much, she said. He closed his mouth. She looked at the chair. At the care in it, the attention, the evidence of someone watching closely enough to build something that fit her specifically. Not a woman in general. Not an idealized version. But her, the actual. Her, the one with the forward lean and the engaged posture and the hands that needed a certain height to work comfortably. You paid attention, she said. I always pay attention, he said, to things that matter. She looked at him. He held her gaze with the direct, steady, completely unguarded eyes of a man who has finally said the true thing and has no interest in taking it back. She stood up from the old chair and sat down in the new one. It fit perfectly. "Silas," she said. I'm not leaving this mountain," she said. "I want you to know that. Whatever happens with the legal case, whatever Consolidated Western does or doesn't do, whatever comes next." She looked at him with the same directness she brought to everything that was real and important. "I am not leaving." He was very still. "You've been waiting for me to leave," she said. "Since the beginning. Some part of you has been waiting for the thing that makes me pack my bag and decide this is too hard or too cold or too isolated." She held his gaze. "I'm telling you to stop waiting." He looked at her for a long time. "I'm telling you," he said slowly, "that I stopped waiting about 3 weeks ago and have been trying to figure out what comes after that." She smiled. It was a real smile, not the careful, managed expression she had worn in Red Hollow, not the controlled composure of the past several months, but the full version, the one that reached her eyes and changed her whole face and was not performing for anyone. "What comes after," she said, "is that we go to Denver, we finish this fight, we come back up the mountain, and we live here." "Together," he said. "Together," she said. The snow started that afternoon. The heavy snow, the real winter snow, the kind the mountain had been building toward since October. It came down in the serious, committed way of something that means to stay, and the cabin held its warmth, and the chair sat where she had placed it at the table, and the letter from Walter Greer lay in the center of it, with its evidence and its promise and its documentation of a machine that had run unchallenged for too long against people who were alone. Mabel Hartwell was not alone. She had not been alone. She was beginning to understand since the moment she got up off the ground in the mud of Red Hollow's Main Street and kept walking. The mountain had been waiting for her. She just hadn't known it yet. The federal hearing was set for the 3rd week of February. Walter Greer sent word by Ryder in January, when the mountain was locked under 4 feet of snow and the lower trail was technically impassable, which meant the rider had made the climb in conditions that indicated Greer considered the news urgent enough to risk it. Mabel read the letter standing in the doorway with the cold coming in around her, and felt the particular sensation of a long-running calculation finally arriving at its answer. The hearing would be held in Denver. Federal court, not territorial. Judge Harlan Combs presiding, a man Greer described in 3 words: thoroughfare, unsentimental, which were exactly the 3 words she wanted to hear. All 3 property owners were required to appear. She folded the letter and turned around. Silas was watching her from the table. "February," she said. "How long do we have?" "5 weeks." She set the letter down. "Greer wants us in Denver 4 days before the hearing. He needs to prepare us." "Prepare us for what?" "For Consolidated Western's legal team," she said. "They'll have at least 3 lawyers, possibly more. Their strategy will be to make the case complicated, to bury the core facts under enough procedural language that the simple truth gets lost." She sat down across from him. "Greer's strategy is to keep it simple. False commission, fraudulent survey, pattern of targeting isolated property owners. 3 documented cases, same mechanism, same company." "And your job," Silas said. "My job is to be the one who can explain the documentation in plain language," she said. "The commission numbers the filing, dates the discrepancies, in a way that a federal judge can follow without a legal degree." "You've been doing that for months," he said. "In a cabin," she said. "Not in a federal courtroom with 3 lawyers trying to make me look wrong in front of someone who gets to decide if we are." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you worried?" She considered the question seriously, the way she considered all serious questions. "I'm concerned," she said. "Concerned is useful. Worried is just fear with nowhere to go." She looked at him. "We have the facts. The facts are real. Real things don't stop being real because someone argues against them." Silas looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. And in his voice was the simple, complete confidence of a man who has watched someone work for months and has arrived at a conclusion that does not require qualification. She took it the way she took everything he offered, fully, without deflecting it. The 5 weeks before they rode down were the best weeks she had known in years. Not because things were easy, they weren't. The snow was relentless, the cold was serious, and the ongoing documentation work that Greer kept requesting required her to spend hours at the table, cross-referencing dates and figures until her eyes ached. But there was a quality to those weeks that she would think about later, when she had the distance to see them clearly. A quality of rightness, of being in the correct place, doing the correct thing with the correct person, that made even the difficult parts feel like something other than difficulty. Silas built her a work table. He built it in the second week of January, while she was deep in the Garfield documentation, and he set it up against the north wall, where the light came in best in the morning hours, and it was wider than the kitchen table, and had a lower surface, specifically, because he had noticed that she worked better without having to hunch her shoulders, and she looked at it for a long moment when he showed it to her, and then looked at him. "You built me a desk," she said. "You needed a proper one," he said. Silas. You keep making me things." He looked at the desk, then at her. Something in his face that was not the almost smile, something quieter and more direct. "I keep noticing things you need," he said. "Ed, making them is the part I know how to do." She moved her work to the new desk that morning and worked there every day after, and every time she sat down at it, she felt the weight of the attention. It represented not the attention of a man performing a romantic gesture, but the attention of a person who watched closely enough to understand what someone actually needed rather than what they were supposed to need. In 11 years, she had not encountered that from anyone, except Clara Hatch, and Clara had been constrained by the limitations of what a boarding house could offer. Silas was not similarly constrained. She thought about that on the long evenings when the wind was outside, and the fire was inside, and he was reading from one of his 3 worn books, and she was drafting responses to Greer's requests, and the silence between them was the full, comfortable silence that only develops between people who have stopped performing for each other entirely. She thought about her mother, who had worn the brass ring on her left hand, and built her life around a man who traded a season of rabbit pelts for a piece of jewelry, because he understood that the gesture mattered, even if the object was modest. She thought about what it meant to be seen. Really seen, not the surface of a person, but the actual substance of them. The working parts, the things they were capable of when given the conditions to be capable. She had been waiting her whole life for those conditions. She had found them 2 days' ride above the tree line in a cabin that had been a one-man operation and had become something else entirely in the company of a man who had been alone 11 years and had not known until a specific muddy morning on a specific market day what he was waiting for. They rode down the mountain in the first week of February. The lower trail had opened in a brief warming that Silas said would last 3 days before the next system came in, and they used all 3 days to make the descent that had taken 2 days in September, because February was not September, and the mountain in February made its terms very clear. Mabel rode behind Silas on the narrow sections where the trail was iced, and the drop on the eastern edge was not something she wanted to think too specifically about. And she focused on her horse and on the sound of Silas's voice talking her through the worst of it, in the steady, calm, informational tone he used when the situation required calm from both of them. "Left side of the trail here," he said. "The ice is worse on the right. Keep him slow." "He's slow," she said. "Slower." She slowed the horse. They made it down. Red Hollow was the first town they passed through, and she had not been back since the morning she left it with one bag and a direction, and the beginning of something she had not known yet how to name. She rode back into it on a February morning, beside Silas Crowe, and the difference between those 2 entries. The woman who had walked in alone with dried mud on her boots, and the woman who rode in now was not about the horse, or the man beside her, or the coat that was warmer than the one she'd had before. It was something in how she held herself, not performed confidence. Not the careful, constructed composure she had worn through 7 rejections like armor. Something simpler and harder to fake the ease of a person who has stopped needing the town's opinion because they have found something that matters more than the town's opinion. People noticed. She saw it happen. Saw the recognition move through people on the main street. The double take, the recalibration. The specific expression of a person, revising a conclusion they had thought was settled. She did not stop. She had not come back to Red Hollow for Red Hollow. They were through the town in 20 minutes, back on the road south, and she did not look back. Silas, riding beside her, said nothing, but she felt him looking at her sideways. "What?" she said. "Tully was on the porch of the hardware store," he said. "Gus Tully. Number 5. Already got a wife, don't need another woman around the place taking up space." "I know," she said. "I saw him." He stared. "Let him stare," she said. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You didn't give him anything. He's not owed anything," she said. And she said it without anger, which was the part that would have surprised her 6 months ago. Not without feeling. The feeling was there. The long memory of standing in front of these men and being measured against a standard designed to find her lacking. But beneath the feeling, something steadier. Something that knew with the calm certainty of a fact that Gus Tully's opinion of her had never been the thing that mattered. It had just taken her a while to find the thing that did. Denver in February was a different city from Denver in October. Harder and grayer, and moving with the particular purposeful haste of people who have somewhere to be and are cold about getting there. They went straight to Greer's office. He was waiting for them. He had been building the case for 4 months, and it showed the office that had been moderately organized in October was now a comprehensive archive of everything. Mabel had sent him, organized in a way she recognized because it was the same organizational system she had developed for Silas's supply records, which meant Greer had been using her own framework to build the argument. She felt a brief fierce pride about that. Greer stood when they came in and shook both their hands, and then said without preamble, "The other 2 property owners arrived yesterday. I need you to meet them." Their names were Harriet Oakes and James Beaumont. Harriet was 63 years old from a ranch in Wyoming Territory that Consolidated Western had stripped of its mineral rights through the same fraudulent commission mechanism 2 years prior. She was a small woman with gray hair and eyes that had the look of someone who had cried everything she was going to cry about a particular thing and was now on the other side of it in the harder and cleaner country of someone who simply wants justice. James Beaumont was younger, 40. Maybe a rancher from New Mexico who had fought the claim for 18 months before losing, and had spent the following 2 years in the particular suspended state of someone who knows they were wronged and cannot find the lever that proves it. Mabel shook both their hands. Harriet looked at her for a moment. "You're the one who found the commission discrepancy," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Mabel said. "I knew something was wrong with those papers," Harriet said. "I told the territorial judge something was wrong. He said I couldn't prove it." She held Mabel's gaze. "Can you prove it?" "Yes," Mabel said. Harriet was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good." One word. She said it the way Clara Hatch said things when something was settled, with the finality of a woman who has been waiting a long time for the right answer and recognizes it when it arrives. They spent 3 days with Greer preparing. He walked them through the structure of the federal hearing, the likely lines of argument from Consolidated Western's legal team, the specific questions the judge would ask, and how to answer them. He was a good lawyer, not brilliant, not flashy, but the kind of methodical and thorough that Mabel trusted more than brilliance, because brilliance was sometimes more interested in its own performance than in the outcome. On the second evening, when Harriet and James had gone back to their hotel, and Silas was talking quietly with Greer about the property survey documentation, Mabel sat alone at the long table with all the case files spread in front of her, and did what she always did when the situation required it. She read everything again, not because she didn't know it, because she wanted to know it the way she knew the supply calculations, not as a series of facts she had memorized, but as a structure she understood completely, so that whatever Consolidated Western's lawyers threw at her, she would be standing on ground she knew. She was halfway through the Garfield Commission papers when she found it. She had read these papers 40 times. She knew every word, every number, every discrepancy. She had built an entire legal argument around the commission number format. But she had not until this moment looked at the notary seal on the bottom right corner of the page. She looked at it now. The notary seal had a name. Notaries always had names. It was the point of them, the human accountability at the bottom of an official document. She had registered the seal as legitimate without looking closely at the name, because the seal format itself had seemed official, and she had been focused on the commission number. The name on the notary seal was R.T. Garfield. The surveyor had notarized his own commission. She sat very still for a moment. A notary cannot notarize a document to which they are a party. It was the most basic rule of notarial practice. The thing that existed specifically to prevent exactly what had been done here. A person certifying the legitimacy of their own authorization. It was not just a discrepancy. It was fraud. Unambiguous, documentable elementary fraud that had been sitting in these papers for 3 years because nobody had looked at the notary's name. She stood up so fast her chair scraped back. "Greer," she said. He looked up from the survey maps. She walked to his end of the table and put the Garfield commission in front of him and pointed. He read it. He looked at her. "The notary," she said. He looked at the paper again. Then he sat back in his chair and said something quietly that she was fairly sure was not language he used in polite company. "How did we miss that?" he said. "We were focused on the commission number," she said. "The seal looked legitimate. We stopped looking when we found what we were looking for." She held his gaze. "This is better than the commission number." "This is better than everything," Greer said. "A self-notarized commission document isn't a procedural irregularity. It's a void instrument. The commission never existed legally, which means every action taken under it never existed legally," she said. "The survey is void. The claim built on the survey is void. The 3-year delay in filing is irrelevant because the mechanism was never valid." She paused. "And any property that Consolidated Western acquired through claims built on Garfield's commissions." Greer was already reaching for his files. "How many other properties?" He said not to her, but to the room, and he was already moving. Silas had come up beside her without her noticing. He looked at the paper, then at her. "You found something," he said. "The notary notarized his own commission," she said. "The whole mechanism is void from the moment Garfield signed it." Silas looked at the paper for a moment. Then he said, "How many properties?" "That's what Greer is finding out," she said. It took Greer 2 hours working through his files and 3 urgent messages sent by hand to the Territorial Records Office to establish a preliminary count. 11 properties, over 6 years, across 3 territories. Consolidated Western had used R.T. Garfield's self-notarized false commission as the foundation for 11 mineral rights claims. Some had been purchased under pressure. Some had been taken through legal proceedings where the property owners, isolated and under-resourced, had not been able to mount a challenge. Some, like Silas's, were still in dispute. All 11 were built on an instrument that had never been legally valid. "Every one of them," Greer said. He set the last file down and looked at the room. "Every claim built on Garfield's commission is void, which means every property taken under those claims was taken illegally." Harriet Oakes, who had arrived sometime in the 2nd hour and was sitting at the end of the table very still, said quietly, "My ranch." "Yes," Greer said. Harriet was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can we get it back?" Greer looked at Mabel. Mabel looked at the files. "The legal process for reversal is complicated," she said honestly, "because some of the properties have changed hands since the original taking, and those subsequent owners may have acquired in good faith. But the original transactions—" She looked at Harriet. "The original seizures from the original owners who were defrauded, those are reversible. If the court finds the instrument void, the transactions built on it are void." Harriet looked at her hands. At her own hands. She was quiet for so long that Mabel wondered whether she had pushed too far, offered too much hope in a situation that still had so far to go. Then Harriet looked up, and her eyes were clear and direct and entirely dry. "Tell me what I need to do," she said. The hearing was on a Thursday morning. The federal courthouse in Denver was a cold stone building with high ceilings and the particular acoustic quality of spaces designed to make official things feel official, where every sound arrived with more weight than it carried in ordinary rooms. Mabel sat at the table beside Greer with Silas to her right and Harriet and James beyond him, and she kept her hands flat on the table and her breathing even and her eyes on the judge's bench. Across the room, Consolidated Western's legal team was 3 men and an assistant, and she assessed them in the first 2 minutes with the practical attention of someone preparing for a negotiation, and identified the one she was most concerned about, the youngest of the 3, who had the look of someone who had done this many times and enjoyed it, who was sorting through documents with the ease of a man who has won this kind of argument before. Judge Harlan Combs entered, and the room stood and sat, and Greer had been right, thorough, fair, unsentimental. He had the face of a man who had been listening to legal arguments for 20 years and had no patience for anything that wasn't evidence. Consolidated Western's lead lawyer went first. How was good? She had expected good, and he was good. The argument was sophisticated, procedural, built to make the commission discrepancy seem like a clerical error rather than deliberate fraud, built to make the pattern across 11 properties seem like coincidence rather than mechanism. He used language that was precise and complicated, and she could see the effect it had in the room, the way complicated language creates its own kind of authority, regardless of whether what it describes is actually true. Greer went second. He was methodical and clear. He laid out the commission number, discrepancy, the premature filing, dates, the pattern across 3 territories. He was building toward the notary seal. She knew he had told her he was saving it, that the structure of the argument needed to arrive there rather than start there. She watched the judge. Combs listened to Greer, the way he had listened to the other side, with complete impassive attention that gave nothing away. He made notes. He asked 2 questions, both precise, both directed at specifics of the documentation. Then the other side cross-examined. The youngest lawyer came at Greer hard on the commission number, discrepancy, arguing that format inconsistencies in territorial documents were common, that the land office had changed its numbering protocols twice in the relevant period, that what Greer was characterizing as fraud was in fact administrative variation. He was fluent and fast, and Mabel watched Greer handle it steadily and thought, he's good, but Greer is steady, and steady beats fast when the facts are real. Then the youngest lawyer looked at her. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "you are the primary author of the documentary analysis submitted by the plaintiff, is that correct?" "It is," she said. "And your legal training consists of—" He paused for effect. 60 days at a territorial land office in eastern Colorado. "My legal training," she said evenly, "consists of 60 days at a territorial land office, 11 years managing farm accounts and legal documentation, 4 months building this specific case, and a facility with numbers that does not require a law degree to be accurate." The young lawyer smiled. It was the smile of someone who has seen this before. "Miss Hartwell, the commission number discrepancy you've identified. I'd like to address the notary seal," she said. The lawyer stopped. "If I may," she said to Judge Combs. Combs looked at her, then at Greer, then back. "Proceed," he said. She reached into the file and produced the Garfield Commission and placed it on the evidence table. "The commission document issued to R.T. Garfield," she said, "which is the foundational document for every survey, every claim, and every legal action taken by Consolidated Western in these 3 territories over the past 6 years. She pointed. "The notary seal, bottom right corner." The young lawyer went very still. "The seal is stamped by R.T. Garfield," she said. "The same R.T. Garfield who is the subject of the commission. A notary cannot notarize a document to which they are a party. This is not a procedural irregularity. This is not an administrative format variation. This is a void instrument. It was void the moment Garfield signed it, which means every survey conducted under it, every claim built on those surveys, and every property transferred through those claims was transferred on a foundation that never legally existed." Silence. The young lawyer was no longer looking at her. He was looking at the document. Judge Combs said, "Mr. Greer, is this the first time this evidence is being presented in this hearing?" "It is, Your Honor," Greer said. "It was identified during case preparation, and we chose to present it at hearing rather than in the preliminary filings to allow opposing counsel the opportunity to address it in real time." Combs looked at Consolidated Western's table. "Counselors, response." The lead lawyer, the young one, stood. He asked for a recess. He said it with the measured tone of a man buying time he knows will not be enough, which was the sound of the case shifting on its axis and everyone in the room feeling it happen. Combs granted 30 minutes. Mabel sat at the table, and did not move, and did not speak, and held the specific stillness of someone who has done what they came to do, and is now waiting for the world to catch up with the fact. Silas put his hand over hers on the table. She turned her hand over and held his, and they sat that way through the recess without speaking, which was exactly the right thing, and they both knew it. When the session reconvened, Consolidated Western's lead lawyer stood and said that his client wished to explore a comprehensive settlement of all claims across all 3 territories. Greer said that his client's terms had been stated and had not changed. The lead lawyer said those terms were acceptable. It was not that simple. After that, it was never that simple. There were documents and specifications, and the particular grinding procedural work of converting a verbal agreement into something legally binding. But the core of it, the thing that mattered, was decided in that moment, in that room. And Mabel sat still through all of it, and felt the long arc of it from the land office in Denver 2 years ago, where she had sat across from a lawyer who looked out his window and told her there was nothing to be done to this room, this table, this document, this moment, and she held the arc of it carefully, the way you hold something that cost a great deal and is finally actually yours. They walked out of the federal courthouse into the February afternoon. Harriet Oakes stopped on the steps. She stood in the cold air and looked at nothing for a moment, and then she turned to Mabel and said without ceremony, "My husband built that ranch. He died 2 years before they took it." She paused. "I couldn't save it for him, but I'm going to get it back for him." Mabel said, "Yes, you are." Harriet nodded once. Then she went down the steps to where James Beaumont was waiting, and the 2 of them stood together in the way of people who have been through something hard in company and understand without discussing it that the shared hardness has made them something to each other. Silas stood beside Mabel. "It's done," he said. "This part," she said. He looked at her. "There's more. There are 9 other properties," she said. 9 other people who lost something because of a document that was void the day it was created. Greer thinks the settlement will include a review process." She looked at him. "I want to help with that." He was quiet for a moment. "From the mountain." "From wherever the work needs to happen," she said. "But yes, mostly from the mountain, from—" He considered this for a long moment. She watched him doing it, not with impatience, not with the urge to push him toward the answer she wanted, because she had learned that Silas Crowe's silences were not absence, but process, that he thought in a way that required quiet, and arrived at answers that were worth waiting for. "Then we'll need to build you a proper office," he said. She looked at him. "If you're going to be doing this kind of work from the mountain," he said, "the desk I built is fine for correspondence. But you'll need more shelf space, better light in the afternoon, a proper place to keep files." She stared at him. "I'm thinking the east wall," he said. "The afternoon light is better there." "Silas," she said. Are you telling me you're going to build me an office?" "I'm telling you I'm going to build you what you need," he said. "Same as always." She looked at him for a long moment. At the face that had gone from closed to open over the course of 5 months, at the man who had been alone 11 years and had looked across a muddy street and seen not what she looked like, but what she was made of, not what she couldn't do, but everything she could. "I want to go back to Red Hollow," she said. "Before we go home. I want to go back through it." "All right," he said. "Why?" "Because the last time I rode through it, I was going somewhere," she said. "This time, I want to ride through it, knowing where I've been." He tilted his hat, a small, deliberate gesture, the Western man's specific vocabulary for things that didn't require words. "Then we'll go through Red Hollow." They went through Red Hollow on a Friday afternoon, and it was not the Red Hollow of 7 rejections and dried mud and laughter from a hardware store porch. It was just a town, a small frontier town in a shallow valley that collected wind and noise, and had a social order that had decided what mattered and gotten it wrong in the way that small orders often do. Mabel rode through it upright with Silas beside her, and she looked at the town with clear and level eyes and felt nothing that needed managing. That was the difference. In September, she had ridden out of Red Hollow, holding herself together against what it had done to her. In February, she rode through it, and there was nothing to hold together because there was nothing pulling at her. The town had no power over her, that she had not handed it, and she had stopped handing it anything a long time ago. She saw Caleb Farrow on the road. He saw her. He stared for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating a conclusion, the woman who was supposed to be broken, supposed to be failed, supposed to be somewhere smaller and less than where she obviously was. She did not stop. She did not slow down. She nodded a single civil, entirely unburdened nod and rode past him. She saw Dale Abbott through his store window. She saw Willis Pruitt on the boarding house steps. She did not stop for any of them. Not because she was above it. Not because the memory of standing in their doorways with her bag and her experience and her 11 years of hard work and being turned away didn't live in her still. It did. It would always live in her. It was part of what she was made of now. But because she understood riding through Red Hollow on a February afternoon with a legal settlement in her bag and a mountain to go home to, that giving those men her attention was giving them something they had not earned and did not deserve. She had spent enough of herself on men who hadn't earned it. At the far edge of town, where the road bent north and the mountains came back into view. Above the tree line, she stopped. Silas stopped beside her. She looked at the mountains. "I was standing somewhere near here," she said in September, after the 7th rejection. "My legs stopped, and I stood here, and I looked at those mountains, and I didn't know yet what was going to happen." "What did you think was going to happen?" he said. She considered. "I thought I was going to have to figure out something on my own," she said. "The way I'd always figured things out. Alone." And instead, she looked at him. At the man who had built her a chair and a desk, and was already planning an office, who had told her she had standing on his mountain before he knew she would stay, who had said we, before she had earned the right to expect it. Instead, she said, "I found out that figuring things out alone is a skill that becomes something else entirely when you have someone to figure things out with." He held her gaze with those gray eyes that had watched her work and learned her, and decided on the basis of what he saw, rather than what he expected that she was worth deciding for. "Ready," he said. She turned her horse toward the mountain. "I've been ready," she said. They rode north into the thin February light. Two people on a road that led back to a cabin that had started as one man's survival and become something neither of them had the word for yet. But both of them knew the shape of it, knew the weight of it, knew it was real in the way that only things built slowly and honestly and without pretense are real. The mountain rose ahead of them, the way it always rose, enormous, indifferent, ancient, asking nothing except that the people who came to it be equal to what it required. Mabel Hartwell was more than equal. She had always been more than equal. The only thing that had changed was that now she had a place where that fact was known, and a person beside her who had known it since a muddy Tuesday morning, when everyone else was laughing, and he was the only one watching closely enough to see what actually happened when she stood back up. She had not needed saving. She had not needed rescue. She had needed exactly what she had found: a fair fight, solid ground, and one person willing to look at who she was instead of what they expected. She got all three. And she rode toward home, knowing with the quiet and unshakable certainty of a woman who has earned every mile of the road beneath her, that the life ahead was exactly the life she deserved, built by her own hands on her own terms, beside someone who had chosen her, not despite everything she was, but because of it. That was not